listener friends. Welcome back to the Formula Podcast. I'm the producer, Jeremy, filling in for Trevor Carlson on the introduction of this episode with Matthew Manuel. Matthew is a survivor of stage 4 esophageal cancer, and as you'll hear in their conversation, his experience has really shaped his priorities. I hope that hearing his story will motivate you to really seek out what is most important to you so that you can lead a more fulfilling life. Here is Trevor Carlson with Matthew Manuel.
So yes, I'm 31 years old. Even though I look like I'm a mid-20s, just fresh out of college grad, I'm technically a millennial.
My name is Matthew Manuel, and I'm drinking donut shop coffee. Is that not what we were doing?
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were a millennial. And I don't know is it wrong if you refer to somebody as a millennial, is it considered an accusation? I think accusation as a word has a negative connotation around it. I don't see millennials as being a negative thing. I think it's been sort of directed as a negative connotation with the older generation. But I don't. If I give crap to millennials, it's more just kind of a trendy thing. Like, oh, you millennial. I think millennials have it figured out. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I've been working 40 plus hours a week for a really long time. And I don't want to work 40. I mean, I don't know that anybody really wants to. I mean, that's a broad statement. I'm not suggesting that other people don't want to work hard, but perhaps that they should work smarter. I don't know. Yeah. You know what I mean? Having cancer, being diagnosed with it, one of the biggest things I've reflected on this past year is just that. Like, what are we doing? Are we spending all of our time working? Or are we enjoying ourselves? Where's the balance? You know, is it a financial problem or is it a spending problem? See how I segued there from the millennial talk?
I liked how you did that. Welcome to the Formula Podcast, everyone. I'm your normal, regular, everyday host, Trevor Carlson, here with guest Matthew Manuel to talk about just life stuff in general, how things have kind of changed for him since diagnosis with stage 4 esophageal cancer, correct?
Some say esophageal, some say esophageal. And I'm not sure that I care which one is correct. I know that if the G before the EAL at the end of that word was a J, it'd be probably esophageal, right? Because I don't know. But whichever one you choose, I will go with it.
The reason I invited you on is because, we've kind of stayed. I mean, I remember when we were both working at Geometric, I'd come down to the cafe and we'd talk for like 5 minutes, be like, yeah, Bears game, huh? Or whatever. I don't even remember what it was. What'd you do this weekend? I had some beers, played some music. It was great. And then I kind of took off and things kind of changed for you a bit after I left. We've kind of exchanged some messages. You've taken some creative license, or I don't know if that's the right word, but with some of the photos that I've put up, and it's been really fun to see like the stuff that you make, plus, whenever you also humiliate other people online. Though I wouldn't say what you do with my stuff is humiliating. I'm actually like, damn, he's making me look pretty good. Keep it up, Matt. You got some more photos over there?
Yeah, the whole Photoshop thing came about for me 20 years ago. I started playing around in a program called Paint Pro. And it was one of these programs made by a company called JASC. I'm not sure what the acronym actually stands for, but it's back in the day when you could go to Best Buy and just sit there or stand there like a geek and look at all the software boxes, and I remember looking at like Windows 98 back then and thinking, man, if I just had $400, I could buy that. And anyways, Paint Pro was a less expensive photo editing software than Photoshop at the time. I think you could buy it back then for $100, and I got this idea to start messing around with it and screwing with people. And I have some of my early work from 15 plus years ago, and it's absolutely terrible. And what's funny now is in the social media world, terrible memes are often more popular because it appears as if they're intentionally terrible. So when I do terrible memes, it's intentional. And then sometimes I do photoshopping of, like I have done of you, and where it's too good that it loses its humor. So I think it's kind of evolved in the last 20 years where sometimes I go too far, and then I fool people into thinking it's real, and then they get upset when they realize like the joke was on them. I was like, no, I just perhaps went too far and used a few too many tools to make it look like Trevor is actually dancing in Czechoslovakia or whatever. And but that's kind of fun as well. But yeah, I've been doing that for a long time. And I did it back in the MySpace days, made some funny stuff. And I have some of that stuff. I've lost a few hard drives over the years. But, there have been a couple points where I wanted it to become lucrative and realized that there's no way to make money doing this unless I work for the Inquirer. And I have too much pride to do that. So
you spend a lot of your time, working on stuff like that for fun.
You mentioned graphic design. My degree is actually from Mount Mercy in graphic design and fine art. Interesting tidbit. I started out as an art education major, and then I did a field experience at an elementary school. And about 13 minutes into that, realized I was not ever going to do that for a living. But then still had to do that field experience for 4 months. And by the end of that 4 months, I imagined myself being presented with the option of sent out to the middle of the ocean in a canoe with no food, or teach art in an elementary school. And I chose the ocean. But then I realized I could just change my major and just not have to do that. And that would be the easier route to go. No, but sarcasm aside, I would not be a good school teacher. I did a stint at Kirkwood doing continuing education with software. That was a really good experience for me. What I realized is that I could definitely be a trainer and do software and teach that if I was the one making all the money, but paid a lesser wage to do it and tolerate the inconsistencies with the array of students that come in and all the different technical levels, some being not technical at all. It was a tough gig for me, but it was a good learning experience. That was years ago. That being said, my career, mostly I did front-end development. I'm speaking of it in past tense, not because I'm getting away from it, more so because I'm making an attempt to get away from the corporate world and being in the so-called cube farm. And if I'm going to do that kind of stuff, I'm going to do it on my own terms, under my own business entity, from the comfort of my home or a safe space like a coffee shop.
One of the reasons that I was looking forward to talking with you is because, just from myself traveling over the past, I don't even know how much time it's been, year, something like that. I feel like my perspective has changed a lot on quite a few things, but talking to you, I imagine that, and well, from our conversations, that things have changed for you as well. Your perspective has changed a lot. So maybe you kind of want to share that from a career standpoint, how your basically your life-changing diagnosis affected your perspective on like career and work. Because you kind of touched on it a little bit when you were complimenting Millennials for having it all figured out. I'm definitely going to save that clip. And whenever I see you post any shit about Millennials, I'm going to be like, hey, remember when you complimented them all? This will be great.
Yeah. Not to get into the whole millennial thing, but it is interesting having such an eclectic group of friends that I do, ranging in all ages. And like I said earlier, whenever I dish crap to millennials or say anything about that, my perspective on that has changed quite a bit since being diagnosed with cancer. But I do it more in fun than anything. I think there's this stigma around it that is sort of can be simplified with just laziness, but it's not that at all. And then I've had so many different jobs. In my life, going back to starting with detasseling nearly 30 years ago. And I've been around so many different types of people. Every generation as they get older makes fun of the younger generation. That's just kind of this cliche thing that's been around with human beings, since the dawn of time. But definitely having been diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer in early 2018, and going through the chemotherapy and the radiation therapy. It was a lot of painstaking months, and it forces you to change, and not so much because of the treatment, but the treatment coupled with the diagnosis and having the internet at your fingertips to do the research. I mean, who wouldn't do the research? I say that sort of hypothetically, like there are actual cancer patients who refuse to do the research because they don't want to deal with it because it's daunting. But I'm not that person. I've always been a very pragmatic person with every endeavor. And I look at being diagnosed with cancer and going through treatment as an endeavor. And I did a lot of research, and I dug in deep. I read through archived forums of esophageal cancer patients who have passed, ones who are surviving. And in the grand scheme of things, what I recognized over the months was that not many of them survive. And as daunting as that is, at the same time, I've always retained a lot of optimism because I've never felt the way a lot of these patients described how they feel and how they were reacting to the treatment. And that's significant because over the months, as the chemotherapy continued and then heading into radiation therapy in April this year, I always had a lot of fear, but reading these other accounts from other patients, I realized over time that cumulatively they were experiencing on what I was been going through on a much worse level. But then again, we don't know that because you only know how you feel, and how you express that to others can only be conveyed as such. Like, I assume that you, Trevor, are feeling good with your Bohemia coffee right now. Yes. Yeah. But maybe you're suffering too. I don't know. And that's one of the things that I learned going through this is that it's as much about what you convey as to how you are feeling or suffering, or however you want to phrase that. And it's as much about that as it is what we have documented and what we know statistically. With stage 4 esophageal cancer, the vast majority of the patients are over the age of 65. So that's sort of my point in this segment, talking about this, is that over time, what I realized was I'm reading the accounts of all kinds of elderly people going through this. And obviously, hopefully not going to relate to that. There's a joke I have where, people ask me how I'm doing, and I say, well, I'm 43 years old. I have stage 4 esophageal cancer, and I've been through cancer treatment, and it's kind of like, I can make a joke out of it and say, I don't feel a day older than 60. And I have to give my dad credit on that because it's an old joke from childhood where he used to tell us, like, if his doctor said, "How you feeling, Jim?" and the doctor said, "You should," something about feeling as good as his age or whatever. My dad at the time was 60 years old, and my dad said something about, well, he feels like he's 80. So that's not, it's not good. And it's hard to throw humor into this with some people, but I try to comfort others because I noticed through this diagnosis and treatment that a lot of people have a harder time dealing with my sickness than I do, which is interesting from sort of this empath perspective. It's really weird. It's like people are more worried about me than I'm worried about myself. And I think that's a good thing. And what that means is that I'm optimistic enough and perhaps strong enough mentally, emotionally, and physically that people read the stats and they're just like, oh, he's a dead man. I wonder what's going through his head. And I'm over here thinking, yeah, I woke up today. I actually feel all right. I made it down the stairs. I made a cup of coffee. I'm a little groggy. I have neuropathy in my fingers and my feet, but I'm awake. And I've read hundreds of accounts from stage 4 esophageal cancer patients who are no longer on earth. And they suffered tremendously with eating, with fatigue, with the same neuropathy that I have. And I don't know how to wrap this up right now. I guess basically what I'm saying is, yeah, my perspective on everything in hindsight now, having been through the treatment and more recently having good scans and biopsies reveal that there is no viable cancer, whatever that means. Doctors are always ambiguous. Like, yeah, is it no evidence of disease? Is it remission? Is it no viable cancer? I think I really believe like it's legalities on how they phrase that stuff. But yeah, looking back on stuff now, I definitely have a different perspective, and we can talk more about that.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of has to change you. And it's interesting what you said about other people struggling more than you are, because that's, it's interesting because it's my grandpa right now is going through. He just got diagnosed with dementia, and then I found out that both of my grandpas are one of them has passed away, but they were both like manic depressive. My family just did a good job of hiding all of us from them when they went through their episodes. And so he had like a manic episode and then he got lost because turns out he has dementia now too. He's had some strokes and he got lost for a few days, went missing. And it's like the toll that he's not real happy about being in like a home now, but the toll it's taken on everybody else has been like significantly more and significantly like noticeable. So I don't really know why that is, but it's an interesting like observation how it affects a lot of other people around you too, more than just the person that's gone through cancer or whatever it is. So going back to perspective. So I think the question that I asked was about career and work wise. Is there, I imagine that there's people out there. I mean, I talk to them quite often where they ask me like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I'm passionate about. I don't know what to do. Based on your experience going from kind of, normal life to where everything kind of changed for you, where I kind of want to hear your perspective on this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're probably a lot more, I would assume that you have a lot more gratitude for every good day that you have. Maybe you can kind of share your perspective on some of those questions that people might have around like purpose, passion, and then also maybe a little bit about how your perspective has changed on gratitude as well.
It's a good question, and I want to preface it with my answer with we might have to do a couple takes on this, so just in case I end up veering off into La La Land. But there's a certain, I've had this conversation with other people, obviously, probably not in the depth that I may go into here, but I try to summarize it the best way by starting with when I got out of high school, I didn't really know what my chances or opportunities were. I didn't have any money. My family didn't have any money, and I don't want to make that sound like it's this incredibly negative thing, but I went into doing construction and odd jobs and whatnot. And in doing that, unless you go into a trade and stick out an apprenticeship, it's never going to be very financially lucrative. But I learned a lot, and I did that for years. And looking back on it now, I realize how much I enjoyed doing that. What I didn't enjoy was the paycheck and struggling financially. So fast forward to, my mid-20s, I went back to school. And in doing that, the internet was this up and coming thing in the late 90s. High-speed internet landed in Cedar Rapids with broadband through Mediacom in 1999. And that changed everything. So all of my dinking around on computers and stuff prior to that wasn't all for naught. But once we surpassed 56K modems, and then it was just like, I can get stuff done quicker. And I started delving into video and audio editing and making personal web pages and things like that. And I decided I wanted to go back to school and pursue that. And so I did a 2-year degree in computers. And then I had this inclination where I was going to teach. And I talked about that a little bit earlier, but I realized I didn't want to teach. And then I was like, well, what can I do that revolves around making web pages? So I changed my major to graphic design, headed into a career as a web designer / developer. Somewhere along the way, I taught myself how to be a programmer. And the significance in prefacing what I'm about to say is pretty heavy. I realized I'd entered the wrong career about 2 years into it. So I didn't get my bachelor's degree in graphic design until 2005, and I was 29 years old. I worked as a web developer for sort of a startup for 3 years, and in that time realized I did not want to do that for a job. That's very significant because we're talking about 2008, and now it's 2019. I was diagnosed with cancer in early 2018. So for the math folks, you now realize that I spent 11 years doing something I wasn't happy doing. But it wasn't that I wasn't happy building web pages. I realized, having undergone cancer treatment this past year and reflecting on my life and perhaps what's left of it, based on statistics, not a whole lot. But I refuse to be a statistic. That's another conversation. Regardless, you still have to look at those statistics, and as an intelligent, pragmatic person, you have to let it sink in and decide what you're going to do and what you want to do and how you want to spend your time. And I believe I have impeccable work ethic, and that's worth something in 2019 for many reasons. But I can't go back into the office world. And it's not because I don't like making web pages. It's because I recognize now fully what my issues are. And one of my biggest issues is anxiety. And it's relevant to the whole millennial thing, right? That stigma around, well, people come up with a diagnosis or a reason they can't do something, and it's just easy to pass it off. But I'm here to tell you it's a very real thing. There are way many more people in the closet about their anxiety issues. It's disturbing. I'm a very open person and willing to talk about that. It was never about building web pages for me. It was about being around people and distractions. I don't function well around distractions. And that can be something as simple as one person sitting a foot away from me and just interrupting me once every 10 minutes, or it can be 46 people around me having conversations on a Friday afternoon while I'm racing against a deadline. Those are two things that you need to be equipped to handle if you work in the office world. It took me years to realize that I've never been equipped to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just means you need to recognize that and change your life. And facing my prognosis and the statistical data that indicates I won't be alive in 5 years, I'm not going to spend another minute putting myself into those situations.
Looking back, do you think that you would have, like, now recognizing why you kind of had that anxiety and whatnot in the office space, do you think that knowing that now, do you think you would have left sooner?
If I would have had this revelation, it's actually, let me rephrase or restart. I actually tried getting out of being a web developer in 2008, and I took a job as an information architect. And because I thought maybe it was the web development thing that I didn't like. And what I found out, like as I mentioned, is it's actually just working in an office in general that I don't like. So that's worth saying because I think I'm looking to start my own business and get back into doing handyman stuff. From all the stuff I've learned over the years, from my early days in construction and odd jobs to being a homeowner 3 times over, I've been working with tools. I started building skateboard and bike ramps in the 80s. I'm very passionate about working with my hands, but I still want to do web stuff. I want to help people with their websites, small businesses, and that kind of thing. That my point is I just can't go to an office every day and sit amongst a crowd of people with all the distractions. And it's nothing against the employers or my coworkers, many of whom I've made friends with over the years. It's me. And I think I knew it in 2008, but I'd just gotten out of college and I'd gotten my life together. And that's worth mentioning because I didn't really have my life together before college. I was exploring job hopping, trying new things and trying to figure myself out and trying to grow up. So I think I stayed in the career so long because I thought I had to. Like, or what's the point in college? Why did I come this far and try so hard to get to this point only to say, I don't want to do this anymore? And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And it's actually, and by a lot, I can't even emphasize that enough. I've had so many conversations with people who are just stuck in this rut, and they're just like, why did I do this? And it's because of the financial aspect of it. I've been forced this past year to live beneath what I'm used to. I'm not going to say that I've suffered financially, and the reason for that is because of all my friends and family who've come forward and helped us financially. But regardless, in that, I realized I don't need as much money as I always thought I needed, and to put myself back into those situations that cause me high levels of anxiety and stress, I'm not going to do that to myself. And it's not unfortunate. It's actually very revealing and refreshing to know that I'm going to head into doing something where I don't go home at the end of the day completely exhausted because my nerves have all day have been on fire and on edge. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't, regardless of what it is that I can offer somebody from my business, perhaps it's a control thing. But I think for high anxiety people, you have to garner some high level of control, and you have to know your triggers, and you have to know not put yourself into those situations. And that's like my number one goal is to figure out how to avoid going back into the office world the rest of my life, regardless if that's 2 more years or 25 more years.
So it sounds like you've kind of at least got, sorted out where you don't want to be and where you're headed. Now, for those people who are listening and they like the question we were talking about is like they're finding their pursuing their passion and things like that. What advice do you have for them when it comes to finding and pursuing these things based on how your perspective has changed in the last 2 years?
I think in my life experience overall, I'll say more so in my adult life, I don't know that I listened to anybody before the age of 25. I retained some stuff, but at 43 years old, regardless of my cancer diagnosis and the treatment I've gone through, all that aside, this is just a guy who's 43 years old who is perhaps more willing to be honest than most people. And I will say that I didn't listen to anybody when I was younger, and I was selfish and full of myself and perhaps arrogant and all of that stuff that young folks, seem to be categorized as. It's true. That being said, I've realized a lot in the last 10 years, just listening to people. And when it comes to passion and the pursuit of happiness and interest, I think it's scary how many people don't actually know what makes them happy. People know that money makes them happy, and the weekend makes them happy when they don't have to work. And I think there's this overwhelming focus or emphasis on that. Everybody's working for the weekend, or everybody's waiting to crack open that beer or whatever, or smoke that blunt. Whatever your sauce is, so to speak. And I've had so many conversations with people, and it's daunting how many of them actually don't know. My brother, for instance, has said to me over the years, like, if he could figure out a way to get paid to play video games. Well, ironically, that exists now, but it exists more so for the 19-year-old, living in a Minneapolis suburb who is just incredible at video games. Perhaps not my 44-year-old brother, right? Interestingly enough, he has a close friend that he gets paid to play video games. And that friend of his is in his 20s, I believe. But I'm not saying that age is necessarily a significant or relevant thing, but I think it is. In some cases, it's just, that's the way life is. I'm 43 years old. I'm probably not going to get past the judges on American Idol. It's not going to happen. So there is relevance. And I'm not ashamed of that. However, for the people that know what they want to do, pushing that button, so to speak, and executing the plan seems to be the biggest struggle. And it's for the same fears that I've had, and I'm sure you've had, and that is So if I don't get this steady paycheck that I'm used to twice a month or once a week or biweekly, am I going to be able to pay my bills or live up to the standard of quality of life that I'm used to or that I want, perhaps? For a lot of people, it's a want and it's never been a reality. For me, it's not that. It has been a reality. So I stayed in this career forever because of the paycheck, so I could have the quality of life I wanted. And then I get diagnosed with cancer, have all this time literally to reflect on this and this very topic. And then looking back, realizing, but really was the quality of my life what I thought it was just because of that paycheck? No, because for 40 hours a week or more, I was incredibly stressed. And because of that stress, due to my anxiety problems, I didn't sleep well. And because I didn't sleep well, I drank enormous amounts of caffeine. And because I drank enormous amounts of caffeine, I didn't sleep well. And perhaps because I drank enormous amounts of caffeine, I got esophageal cancer. We don't know. I would say if you were to give me 5 things that could cause esophageal cancer, one of them is excessive amounts of caffeine that causes acid reflux. That's absolutely probably a number one contender. So all of that being said, regardless of whether there's 100% truth in that being the reason I have cancer, I can go with that and realize, so was I happy with the paycheck? Yes. But the majority of the time in a 7-day week that I was awake and alert and able to enjoy life. I don't know, people enjoy sleeping, but are you really enjoying life while you're asleep? That's another story. While I'm awake, if you break down the hours, the majority of the hours I'm awake, I was incredibly stressed. So what amount of money do I need to make ends meet, to be happy, that counters that stress? I don't think there is an amount. I think people chase the wind and they get up to this job where they're making 6 figures a year. And if they actually took the time, if they had time to reflect on whether or not they're actually happy, I honestly have met more people in my time who aren't happy regardless of the money coming in. I've met people that don't make any money who are way happier. And I'm sure you, in your world travels, you've witnessed that. It's insane. I learned this going through cancer treatment and not having that same paycheck. And it's an incredible revelation to have, to realize if I'm spending 40 hours a week and incredibly stressed out, that's causing sleep deprivation, that's causing me to drink more caffeine, which just makes the entire thing this vicious cycle. I'm doing it wrong.
I think I think Bill Burr has a quote about this. It's something about, would you rather be, 30 years old, sleeping in your king-size bed, married, couple kids, good job, good career, but miserable as hell, or 30 years old, crashed on your buddy's couch, but pursuing something that makes you just fucking excited to get out of bed every day? I mean, it's pretty clear which path I've kind of chosen, even though I think some people are like, what's this jackass doing? Living out of a backpack. But it's, traveling. I mean, I've talked about this so much. Whenever I'd go to these really poor countries where people are like, I think about this island I was on in Thailand. This mother and husband and their 3 kids all slept on this like big flat bed. I don't even know, maybe it's a bungalow or something, but then it had like its 4 poles, and then it was just outside, but then they had plastic that would roll over it, and they would all sleep in there. And that's just where they lived out of. And then they had like a outside kitchen. But every single day they were outside playing, they were having dinner together, they looked really happy. They weren't complaining about anything, they weren't complaining about their house or anything like that. Even in Eastern Europe where people are, they're just like, it's like people make $400 a month there on average in a lot of these places, which you're just like, how can you even live off of that? But they're so nice. They're so nice. And they're not, I wouldn't say they're like so happy, like they're running down the streets celebrating every day, but they have like their quality of life, even though they can't afford like the the new sneakers, or like maybe they can't get the new iPhone when it comes out. But it just seems like they're much happier than maybe somebody who, like, I think about this myself because I've done this to myself many times. I even just realized I was doing it recently because I feel like it's so easy to get sucked into this or pulled into this, where you're like, okay, well, if I just make a little bit more money, then I can do this, or then I can get that, or whatever it is. And then when you get home, well, for me, this is when I know I'm messing up. So when I get home at the end of the day, and I just I can't put my phone down. Like, I just can't sit still. Like, my nerves are fried, and I can't sit and read a book. I can't sit still. Once I kind of start hitting that, I mean, one day every once in a while is not a big deal because, you get stressed, it's normal. But if you're going, for me, if I'm going home every day and I'm feeling like that, or I'm going back to like an Airbnb or I rented or whatever it is, I know that something's wrong, and that's not the life I want to be building towards, no matter how much money it is. Because I think you were kind of hitting on this a bit, that there's no amount of money that you could trade for peace of mind and quality of life and health.
Yeah, and that's a good point as far as how you feel at the end of the day. And I can reflect on the past 10 years of my life, and even going back to my divorce in 2012, and just looking at myself back then and realizing what I was going through, and even thinking about some of the conversations I had with people back then that were memorable for whatever reason, whether I said something or they said something that really stuck in my head. I very much knew back then that I didn't want to be in the position that I was in. And there were a lot of tells around that. But it just kept progressing and getting worse for me over the years. And I want to bring up my girlfriend, my better half, Angie, is a good example to bring up here. She's always been happy, and I don't know if jovial is the word, just smiling and happy and kind and courteous. And, she's just always kind of done whatever she wants, and she survives. I refer to it sort of as I don't know if a bohemian lifestyle is what it is. I can't speak for other countries and nationalities or whatever, but I can say in America, people are quick to criticize her because she does what she wants. And I've been guilty of that too, not specifically for Angie, but others who live life the way she does. And getting diagnosed with cancer and then going through the treatment and literally feeling sick and like a different person and living in fear and being drugged up and all the things that go with that. I've had all this time to not only reflect on myself, but to genuinely observe her and who she is and where she's come in life. And it's very admirable and inspirational to see that, she's 35 years old and she's happy and she's doing whatever she wants. And she never put herself into that mold that we, at least as Midwestern Americans, seem to think that people are supposed to do this thing, like there's this pattern or this, everything's set in place. Like everybody's mapped out, right? Like, well, she should just go, work a 40-hour a week office job. Well, that's what you do, right? She should go to church. She should. Everybody's got this idea in their head of what people should do. And they're absolutely incorrect. And I may not have said that prior to cancer, probably would have, but now I say it. I say it with much more depth and ferocity, I guess. Like people can do whatever you want, and there isn't a mold. Even if you don't know what you're passionate about, the concept is at the end of the day, you got a roof over your head and you're eating and you're working on something. And nobody should be allowed to criticize or ridicule what other people do, especially if they're happy. But what people do is human. It's a human inclination to want to share misery. And I realize that more and more as I get older, it's like a lot of people are just pissed off because they feel like they've been sold a bill of goods. They've been duped, like this dream, right? Like I'm going to go get this awesome job, or I'm going to go through college, and I'm going to do this thing, and it's going to be this rigmarole. I got to use that word. It's like, for lack of a better word, this rigmarole where, well, this is just what you do, right? You work at the office and you come home, and it's this very old school sort of conservative value that is going by the wayside. And I haven't been around the world, but like you have, but I'm certain that other countries and cultures have adapted to this a long time ago. Whereas Americans, we have this ingrained greed and competitiveness that I now view as a disease worse than cancer, personally. I really feel that way. It's like, we got to stop trying to impress everybody. It's absolutely pointless to try to impress other people. And I'm watching people go bankrupt, become miserable, become obese because they are so stressed, worried about what their friends, neighbors, and family think. I don't think there's ever going to be an end to it. Perhaps post-apocalypse. For me, I've never really lived that way, but I have. But for the most part, not. And now, absolutely not. I refuse to, have my life, my day mapped out by what somebody else perceives as the right thing to do. And Angie, coming back to her, she's always had this figured out. And, Angie's always had this figured out. And I do find it inspirational. Having her around me as much as she is, I may at times be like quick to criticize, but I realize when I'm doing that criticism, I realize it's projection, and it's because perhaps I feel that I've been given the raw deal because I went to college and I had to go endure this office job that I know and I can't stand. And why doesn't she have to do it? And it gets back to that competitiveness. Like, you should have to be miserable too. We're all miserable together. And it's just a stupid mindset to live by.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this because, I feel like I tried really hard to do like the normal thing, but, and even like when I was working at the same company you were at, from like everyone else's perspective, and like, man, you're doing really well. Like you're killing it. You're like hitting all these goals. You're not even 30 yet. Damn. And then I'd go home and I'd be like, my God, I'm so miserable. Like I just would feel terrible. I was sick all the time. I was in my 20s and I was sick all the time. That's ridiculous. And I was working myself into the ground for what? Yeah, I cared about the project I was working on at that point in time, but you can only go so long at that pace, and it's easy to fall into then, like, I would call it like escapism, whether that's, binge watching 20 hours of Netflix on the weekends, just getting like blackout drunk, just drinking all the time, smoking blunts, as you said, whatever it is, however you can just escape the reality. It's really sad because, maybe you enjoy Netflix and drinking and whatnot, and that's okay. Just looking at myself in the past, when I noticed that I'm not able to, like, the biggest thing for me is I'm not able to sit like with myself. When I can't do that, then I know that something needs to change. And I don't even know what to say about the whole like greed thing, or the opinions of other people, when that becomes more important than your own happiness. Yeah, we've been working more on like the social media side of things for what we're doing, and I brought on a new team member that's kind of helping manage a lot of this stuff, and she was like, "You should post more pictures of this and that," and I'm like, I'm so anti, I'm so anti like putting my stuff out there for some reason, because I think it has to do with like that. I'm not comparing it to anybody else's stuff, but it's more, I see a lot of other people doing it, and I see how it makes me feel. I notice how it makes me feel when I see it, and it's more of this. Like I find myself very annoyed. Like I'm like, you are seeing just like a highlight reel of these people's lives, and I know a lot of them and what it's actually like behind the scenes, where it's like, I'm sure couples that post like, oh, I'm so in love, and then behind the scenes they're just like at each other's throats, and like you see that enough, and you're just like, for me, it makes me kind of be like, why do you find it necessary to create that perception that things are like if we were sharing like every moment of the days when I travel, there's a lot of days where I'm like lost, or I'm starving, or like I'm like shit's going south, and I have to like work through it. But I don't always share those things because I'm too busy actually figuring out where I need to go and or what to do. But it's almost like, maybe if people were more honest about like kind of how you have been about like your anxiety and those types of things, maybe you wouldn't have to try so hard to seem so perfect.
I agree with you 100% on the social media facade that people try to, I don't know, put on display as far as look at us, look at what we have. Absolutely the need of Americans specifically to compete and the greed and to show off, that it obviously extends to social media and it's abused. And anybody could have seen it, headed that way years ago. I mentioned earlier the MySpace days. MySpace was a different beast than Facebook, obviously. And I don't remember people getting into a lot of arguments and all that stuff on MySpace. And it was really just a lot of stupid stuff, really low resolution photos and everyone making their own backgrounds. Having a degree in graphic design doesn't mean that I'm a good graphic designer, but I definitely can look at graphic design and be like, that shouldn't have ever been created. And I bring that up as I sit here smiling, thinking about MySpace and when they let people do their own backgrounds. Oh my gosh, that was awful. I'm glad that didn't happen with Facebook. There's a lot of people who are still upset about that though. Like, I want to change my face. I want Comic Sans font and a pink background with. Anyways, I don't know why we segued into that. However, you mentioned something about manic depression earlier. And, I've never been clinically diagnosed as having bipolar disorder. It's been suggested, but I never wanted to go through that process of being diagnosed. And I guess I handled that the same way I handled cancer treatment. And that is, I don't want to be statistics. I don't want to be a diagnosis. I don't want to let that define who I am. I don't want to be that person that is in a bad mood on Tuesday, and then I just expect everybody else to forgive my behavior. Well, I have bipolar disorder. So you just have to, understand that and tolerate me. I don't believe in that. I believe regardless of your diagnosis, your behavior and attitude reflect who you are as a person. And whether or not a doctor has said, you are this and you need to take this drug, if you're being an asshole, you're just being an asshole. And that's how I look at things. But along the same lines is I recognize when I'm in a bad mood or I'm not a person that other people want to be around. And I understand my triggers and what causes that. A lot of times it has to do with sleep deprivation or hydration or nutrition. But I refuse to be diagnosed because I'm 43 years old and I've survived, and now I've made it through cancer treatment, and I feel like I'm strong enough that I don't need to take medication and this, that. Others might disagree. I do want to mention that others, you brought up Bill Burr earlier, one of my favorite comedians, and I totally relate to him on this. He mentioned, he does a skit talking about how his wife loves everything about him except the person he is. And I've never put myself on that level of Bill Burr. I have a temper. I definitely have some anger issues. I mentioned I have terrible anxiety issues. I have all these issues. Yeah. But I'm not going through my day saying, I don't walk into a coffee shop and say, hey, I have high level anxiety, but I'm functional. When you scream my name to come get my coffee, could you do it at this volume? I don't expect people to be on eggshells around me is what I'm saying. I think there are a lot of people that go forth in life every day after they get up with this diagnosis, and they're wearing it like it's a halo or something. And it's like, well, everybody knows that Matthew has bipolar disorder, so we have to do this differently. I don't want to be a burden on people. But that being said, recognizing that kind of stuff about yourself and being happy and doing the right thing to give every day your best is very, very important. And some people need help with that. Having gone through cancer treatment now and living with this diagnosis, that in and of itself, even just written on paper for what it's worth, is enough to motivate me to want to get up every day and just live and survive and not be a burden to anyone, especially myself.
Well, let's talk a bit about maybe like the change in mindset that might have occurred from your diagnosis. So this was about a year and a half ago, 2 years, somewhere in that time frame, June of 2018. So if we go back to pre-June 2018 and now where you are now, which is quite a bit different, I'm sure. Walk me through like how maybe you looked at the world in like a short little tidbit. You don't have to give me a ton. Talk to me about how you looked at the world before, maybe how that, like the moment where that changed, and then how it's really changed, like how you think about, so I guess what I'm asking is how you perceive like your time now compared to maybe how you perceived your time before, maybe the value of your time, the value of the relationships, those types of things.
So that's a great question. And it would be easy to dive into that and spend a lot of time talking about it. But I've spent so much time thinking about this and talking about it this past year with so many people and writing about it that I feel like I can summarize. Prior to cancer, I'm not going to lie to you, there were many moments where I was looking for sort of a way out. And by that, I don't mean suicidal, a way out of life, but just a way out of my situation. And what my situation was, essentially, as I talked about earlier, is that I've sort of trapped myself in this financial tunnel where I have this quality of life and like, this is the stuff that makes me happy. And this is what I want to do. And, it takes this much money to do that. Right. But I never had a retirement plan. Okay. And I have all kinds of thoughts and philosophies on retirement that we won't get into, but I'll summarize that with, I've met all kinds of men over the age of 70 and 80 in my life, and many of them have had retirement plans and many of them haven't. And as far as collectively speaking, they're all just about as miserable as one another, regardless if they're on Social Security or if they had a great 401k and they're golfing every day. You ever been on a golf course on a tee off time on Thursday morning? All those old retired guys, they're the biggest group of obnoxious, ornery assholes I've ever met. And so my point is being a pragmatic person, I look at that and think, okay, so you worked here for 35 years and you retired and you saved up all this money, and now you're just really pissed off and in a lot of pain on a golf course. Point being, before I got diagnosed with cancer, it's not that I was thinking, okay, I'm going to work until I'm 75 years old and then I'm going to be physically incapable. I was always realistic to thinking eventually, because of the career I am in, I'm going to cap out in salary. Well, that sort of already happened anyway. But there's going to be nowhere for me to go. And realistically, the up-and-comers in computer science and development are starting to work circles around me. And they're so eager and they're so not jaded. And I say that because I lost that eagerness and I have been jaded by the industry and the office world. So my plan was to find a way out of that career and pursue something else, perhaps less financially lucrative, but at least I would be enjoying myself. And I mentioned that specifically, not that your question should completely revolve around career, but for the reality of our adult lives is that is our adult life, like figuring out how we're going to spend our time and how we're going to feed our faces and that. So prior to cancer, I had this goal of how am I going to get out of my career and what am I going to do in that and what I'm going to do. And then I got diagnosed with cancer and I was like, well, do I need to worry about that anymore? Because I'm just going to die. And it really is, for me, it's that simple. Like, okay, I don't really need to worry about it anymore. And the reason I bring that up is because you wouldn't think that when you're told you might not be here in 5 years, that one of the first things that comes to mind is, oh, I don't have to worry about changing my career anymore. But it absolutely was one of the first things that came to my mind. And the relief from that, it's so interesting to be told 1 minute that statistically you won't be here in 5 years. And then within minutes later, you're thinking, I don't have to worry about changing my career anymore. And then I'm happy. That is the biggest revelation out of anything. Oh my gosh, I worked to put myself into this career that made me so unhappy that I've now been diagnosed with a terminal cancer and I'm happier with the diagnosis than I was when I was working. That's scary, but I can't stress that enough. That's how much I was disliking my career. And a lot of that is knee-jerk reaction and shock value, because if you're an optimistic person like me and you're told something negative, you want to get that. You want to escape from that. You were talking about escapism. And I don't mean by going out and getting drunk or skydiving, but just being alone with your thoughts at 7 p.m. on a Monday. What does a cancer patient like me think about at 7 p.m. on a Monday? And in the initial onset of the diagnosis, I thought, I don't have to worry about changing my career anymore. And as time went on, I realized, I'm going to survive. Oh, now I got to worry about changing my career again. But that being said, because of the diagnosis and the statistics around it, it's kind of like, you know what? I'm willing to take a dive and try some risky things because why not? I'm just going to do whatever.
Is it really risky though once you've realized that statistically you have a sooner expiration date than maybe you expected? And I can go into a whole other I can go down a whole nother rabbit hole with that, but I'm curious to your answer.
You're absolutely correct in that assumption. Like, is it really risky? And the answer is no. I mentioned my girlfriend, Angie, her being closer to me than anyone else. She can tell you that I have my moments of anxiety almost daily where I'm like putting my foot down and kind of yelling and saying, I got to worry about the mortgage and all this stuff. And I got to figure all this stuff out. But they're literally moments. Whereas before cancer, it was my entire life thinking, oh my gosh, if I give up this career, I don't care about giving up the career and saying I'm no longer a senior front end developer for a company. It was never about that. I don't have a problem, accepting that, okay, I wasn't happy, because I know so many people in that line of work who aren't happy. That will never change. And that's fine. But getting diagnosed with cancer, and thinking about, first thoughts are, I don't have to change my career anymore because I'm not going to be alive. And as haunting as that might be for my friends and family to hear, that is really what goes into your head. Like, you have to look at all the positive stuff. You have to, or you can just curl up in a ball in a corner and waste away. And unfortunately, a lot of people do that. And I didn't have to do that, but thinking about diving into my own business now and the risk around it, it's so less frightening. It's just like, whatever. We'll figure it out. Yeah. I set up that GoFundMe after I was diagnosed, and that's something I never would have done in a million years had I not been diagnosed with a cancer as severe as a stage 4 esophageal. But, I was just like, you know what? I don't have any money because I'm an idiot. And you'd be surprised, probably not surprised, as to how many people could relate to that but would never admit it. And what I learned in doing that specifically is that there's all kinds of other people that are broke way worse than I am, but they would never let you know that. Getting back to the Facebook and social media and the displays people put on, people are broke. And I'm not going to get into as why people are broke, other than we like to spend money and reward ourselves for working a job that makes us miserable. I was broke. I say that in past tense because the term in and of itself, broke, sort of has this stigma around it. I was broke, and not just in a financial aspect. I was completely broke. And now I have less money, but I'm no longer broke, if that makes sense.
Honestly, I remember sitting in the cafe and chatting with you, and you seem, in a weird way, even though, maybe your expiration date got moved up, you seem a lot happier. And as you're talking about this, I've been having this conversation with my brother so much. I'm also guilty of these things too. So when I'm giving him advice, I'm also like trying to tell myself the same shit. So, he has some difficulties at work with coworkers. He comes home, he has struggles with relationship, whatever it is. And, then he doesn't have any money because he spends it all. He goes golfing, whatever it is, just as an example. And like I was talking with him, like, he's like, well, I'm making so much money. I'm like, no, things are as bad as they can possibly be for you right now. You aren't happy at your job. If you were happy, you wouldn't be calling all the time to talk about it and vent. And you're also broke. So you're doing something you hate and you have no money. So here, I'm sure you've heard a lot of stuff like that. And from your shoes, what advice do you give to somebody like that to make them realize that, they could wake up and be in the shoes you are now, where all of a sudden now you realize that your time is a lot shorter than you expected and your priorities are changed. So I guess what advice would you have to somebody in their 20s that's saying something along those lines?
That's a great question. And regardless of my health situation with the cancer, I've always had thoughts on this. They're definitely, I wouldn't say different now, but perhaps spoken with more emphasis. I think the issue is people have an idea in their head of what they want to do and to make money and to make a living. And most people don't pursue that. Most people pursue what they envision others want them to do. And we all hear these stories about, well, Dad wanted me to be this, Mom wanted me to be that, Grandma wanted me to be that, or my brother does this or my sister does that, and that's what I'm going to do, or whatever. And I think people get roped into these careers and because they think, that's what they need to do. And unfortunately, we live in a time where, with finances and inflation and all that stuff, it's difficult to do the jobs that we want to do and make a living. And I say that not because I'm accusing everyone of not doing the thing they want to do, but there's so many comedians who have spoken about this. Like, nobody really gets out of high school and says, man, all those years in baseball and football and soccer or whatever, all I could ever think about was I wanted to be an insurance underwriter. You know what I'm saying? But so many people go into insurance underwriting because it pays well and the benefits are good. And I sincerely hope a lot of people who do that do enjoy it. It's not something I would want to do, but I use that as an example specifically because without even knowing what that job entails, most people will hear that and be like, oh my gosh, I'd rather just go whitewash the fence every day for a living or whatever. And I say, based on my experience with some of the jobs I've had, that perhaps I wasn't always as grateful as I should have been for having the position. But more importantly, to your point regarding your brother, I realized over the years where I was just spending money. So the advice I give to the younger generation is, regardless of what you do, whether it's not your actual passion, happiness is a mindset. I think there's a quote by Abraham Lincoln that talks about that. Like, people are just about as happy as they set themselves out to be. If you come to the conclusion at an early age that this is your lot in life and this is what you're going to do forever, and there's no escaping that, then you need to be able to accept that. Acceptance is a big thing, and look at it as a means to pay for the rest of your life to be enjoyable. I think that people are becoming more in tune with themselves and emotionally aware as time goes on, the younger generations, because society is allowing us to be that way. And with that emotional awareness, people are becoming more in tune with the fact that they don't want to sit in an office all day and they don't want to do this all day. But the biggest problem is not so much the job they're doing 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. The problem is the money they're spending after 5 p.m. And my advice is to look at what you're spending and document that. I've been doing spreadsheets for years, and I can tell you with a certainty that for years I was hyper aware of how stupid I was being with money. There's something to be said for that. Because if you're unhappy and you want to project and blame and point fingers, and then you get to the spreadsheet at the end of the day and you realize, okay, I had $800 in checking and now I have $110. I don't get paid for 10 days, but man, I got the new iPhone. And I really needed that new iPhone, man, because now I can post high-res 4K photos of myself. You're doing it wrong. And as Trevor sneaks his iPhone away. But the case in point, that's a good example this day and age, right? But it's been true for years. If you're not happy, look at your sleep patterns, look at your nutrition, look at your spending habits. The thing I've learned this last year is that if I don't have the money, I don't spend it. And we could talk about credit cards, but we're not going to. If I don't have the money, I'm not spending it. Whereas prior to cancer, if I had the money, I spent it. And it's because I wasn't happy with my career and my inability to make the change and take the risk and take the leap, to backpack around the world like you do. So I was just spending money. But I had fun, but I was broke. And the younger generation, they're no different. They got to have all this stuff. It's just stuff, these material things. Materialism is a disease. You don't need all that shit. And that's my advice as a 43-year-old man with stage 4 esophageal cancer. If you're truly unhappy, look at your spending, document it. If you are incapable emotionally of documenting your spending because you know it's a shit show, you already have your answer. But if you're unsure if your spending is the problem, document it. Keep track. It's basic math. Learn how to run Google Docs spreadsheets and do formulas. It's real simple addition, mostly subtraction for most people. They're in debt, and it's not the job always. It's not the relationship. It's not your family or your neighbors. It's not the thermostat and all this other horse shit that people think are causing their misery. Yeah. It's because you're getting, at the end of the day, after your paycheck, you're spending your money on all this stupid shit. And I want to stop and say real quick, my brother and I talk about this all the time. There is a threshold. I don't want to make it seem like money doesn't buy happiness. There is a threshold. I mean, you can't live and have a great quality of life in the Midwest, at least making $15 an hour. You just can't do that anymore. And everybody understands that. There is a threshold. But once you get to that threshold, whatever that may be, and it's different for everybody, for guys like you and me who don't have children, it's way different than parents. Yeah. But once you surpass that, if anybody can work hard enough to surpass that, and I say that loosely, not everybody, but a lot of people, the majority of people that I know who bitch about being broke, they're capable of making more money. They just don't want to. Yeah. Yeah. Because if you're awake between 5 p.m. and 10 p.m., sitting on your ass, watching TV, eating nachos, you could also be working and making more money. Yeah. However, that's what it is. It's the spending. It's ridiculous how many people are unhappy because they have $20,000 in credit card debt. And if they actually took the time to say, what did I do with that $20,000? They either ate it and shit it out, or they bought some incredibly unnecessary thing to show off to somebody else. Yeah. The big house thing, right? I got to have a $250,000 house on the outside of town so everybody can see how successful I am. So it's about giving a shit as to whether or not you care what people think your level of success is. And everybody seems to think that they got to prop themselves up and look how smart and successful I am and how hard I work. And I'm telling you, it's all just a big friggin' joke. Like
one of the things that you made me think about with of your last points was how over the last year, like we're talking about how people keep spending, and it's like this chase, this race to get like the new stuff, the cool stuff. As you mentioned, I hid my new iPhone that I just got. It's pretty nice, but it's something. It's this thing where it's like we're always getting more stuff, and I mean, for people who are just listening, or for people who have been following for a while, I spent the last year basically just living out of 2 bags. One was like my work bag, which is like laptop, notebooks, all that jazz in it, mic. And then I had another bag that was pretty much half gifts that I had picked up along the way that I ended up bringing home. And then the other half was like clothes. I think I had 3 pants, a couple shorts, a few shirts, and then like socks and underwear. That was all I had for this whole year. And then honestly, it was like I feel like this year it's like the happiest I've ever been, having the least amount of stuff. It didn't just have to do with like, people might see some of the cool pictures of like beaches and things like that, which is really awesome. It's fun to go to those places and check them out, but it's not always like really like super awesome beach stuff. There's a lot of shit that comes with it. And it's funny because like my overall expenses significantly went down too, because I cut back on drinking a ton because I was always kind of doing other stuff that I enjoyed, where being hungover might have been fairly detrimental. So I mean, I would just double down on what you said about like, you don't need all these things to feel good about yourself, to escape, whatever it is. I mean, it's really just about, can you sit alone with yourself on a Monday night after your first day of work? And if you can't, without, putting on Netflix or, having a few beers or whatever it is, then maybe, take a look at, how much you're spending on a lot of that stuff and see if you can start putting some of it away or reducing your expenses so you can maybe move. Because, I mean, I think about it too. It's like if you're making, let's say you're making like let's say $4,000 a month, but your expenses are like $4,000 a month. It's like you're doing just as well as somebody who's making $2,000 a month, right? It's just you might have a little bit of a nicer lifestyle, but if you reduce your salary down to $3,000, but you reduce your overhead to $1,000 a month, I mean, is there any? I mean, as you were saying, it's like doing something you don't enjoy, but being broke. But let's say you reduce your salary, but you cut your expenses down significantly because you don't need all this extra stuff. I mean, now you're actually better off financially and you're happier.
Yes. On that, along those same lines is, some people know this about me, that before I was diagnosed with cancer, I was trying to figure out how to work less and maintain the same quality of life or standard of life. I don't think quality and standard are necessarily synonymous, but it's worth mentioning that I was trying to figure out how to work 30 hours a week. And that's just an arbitrary number, but more importantly, recognizing that I needed to be at the office less to be happier. And that may seem obvious on the surface to most people, but it's much more complex. You mentioned, spending versus income. It's that debt to income ratio thing that we get, that terminology or whatever we get from banks or lenders. But debt to income ratio doesn't start and stop with financial. It's mental and emotional as well. You may be able to trace your emotional and mental wellness directly to your finances and look at it from a debt to income ratio perspective. And what I mean by that is regardless of your financial situation, debt to income can pertain specifically to your emotional well-being, and such that you're spending all of this time doing this stuff that is wearing you out. It doesn't matter if you're spending money. But over time, what you realize is, I enjoy spending money. I like buying new shiny stuff and having the best of the best or whatever. But people rarely take the time to figure out this material thing that they're spending their money on, or whatever the event is or the material is, how much time that is in your day or your week or your month. And what I mean by that is so you bought this shiny thing on Amazon while you're sitting at your desk at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. And are you actually going to use it? Is it going to be hung on a wall? Is it something you're going to consume? How much time are you actually spending using that thing? And what are all the other side effects of using that thing? You mentioned drinking. So you woke up to the fact that, I spent a lot of money on drinking, but I couldn't do the stuff while traveling hungover. So regardless of how much drinking costs you financially, you're talking about what I'm expressing here with debt to income ratio. Perhaps the debt was, the debt of that is the hangover. The income is enjoying the drinking part of it, but then you wake up and you suffer. That's the same thing with spending money in general. We have these fleeting moments where, Black Friday is a big thing here in the United States, where people go out and buy all kinds of shit that they don't need. And I mean that, like, it's just stuff that people do not need, but it makes them feel good. And they buy all this stuff, but they don't look at the fact that, okay, so I have that thing, but how often do I actually use that thing? And how important is it? I can't even fathom how perhaps someone would spend $600 on a purse that they're going to carry once every 3 months that, goes with this $100 blouse or whatever. If it were a woman, I can't understand men who buy boats that live nowhere near bodies of water, right? Yeah. But I get it. It makes you feel good, and you have this thing, and you're like, hey, I have this boat. I have 2 electric guitars hanging from my wall that I can play, but I haven't played them since April because of the neuropathy in my fingers onset by chemotherapy. But they're there, and they're worth a lot of money, and I can play them. I like having them, but sometimes I think about selling them because I don't use them. And that's probably a bad example, because really what it is people wanting to have that new car that has that new GPS system or detects curbs. They want that $60,000 vehicle to get from point A to point B, and they don't assess how much time they actually spend in it. Most of these people buying these vehicles, it's a commuter, right? So if you look at the grand scheme of the week and how much time you spend in it, but your payment is $525 a month, it's just absolutely ridiculous. But people seem to think that they need that, and they don't assess the emotional debt that they get from that. They just know that it felt really good to make the purchase, and when they're in it, it feels really good. But even that wanes over time, like the shiny new phones. You know damn well that when they come out with a phone that does 4K video and pushes it right to the cloud, no matter where you are, you're going to go get it, and you're going to be like, this is sweet. But you don't need it. And maybe, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Not recognizing that it isn't a necessity is perhaps the bad thing. If you realize what you're doing is shameful, that's at least half of the battle. Like, just admit it. I don't think a lot of people admit it or recognize it.
I would say it comes back to having clear values and then intentions. I can't really speak for anybody but myself on this, but when I do something where that doesn't necessarily line up with what my values are, which would maybe be like not buying a lot of like new stuff. Like I try to buy I buy and keep things. I fix them. I don't see the point in, like, there's nothing wrong with my jeans because they have a little cut in them. I will sew them up, or I might bribe somebody else to help me sew them up or put a patch on them. I do. I have a sewing kit in my backpack. So it's like when I do something I realize, like, if I would have been being more intentional or been more in alignment with my values, I would have chosen something different. It usually comes back to I was under a high level of stress when I made that decision. I was usually probably stressed out, overtired, wasn't taking care of myself. And then I was like, well, this iPhone was very intentional. I don't want it to sound like I'm just bashing on buying the new iPhone. It's like giving yourself that headspace and that time and the energy to actually ask yourself, like, okay, if I'm like doing the math on time, right? It's like, I don't even own a vehicle right now because, it's not necessary to overseas. And you can just rent something if you need it. But it's like, how much would I spend on this? Okay, so say you spent $60,000 and you live in town and it takes you 20 minutes drive to work, 20 minutes back. The car's parked 95% of the time, not going anywhere. And now we have like a $500 a month loan payment on it. Plus we got full coverage for another $200 to $300 a month. It's like you're paying. I feel like we're turning this into like a financial literacy lesson, but I think it's a lot of intention though too. It's like before I traveled, I would say like, oh, traveling is really important to me. I want to travel more. But then when I looked at where I was spending my money and my time, it was like I spent significantly more on, going out on a Friday and Saturday night than I did on a trip or anything. I spent more money on a lot of things, and I spent my time in other places. Watching Netflix, whatever it was. And, once it's weird how your spending kind of goes down once you get all that stuff in alignment. You don't really have to, it's more intentional, I guess. Maybe the spending isn't going down. It's just more of like an intentional purchase or an intentional decision with time. And speaking of time, I think we're probably running pretty long at this point. So if anybody's made it this far, thank you for listening to us rant a bit. Now, I do have like one or two final questions for you. One, I guess if you have any more thoughts on this topic, feel free to share them. But then the first question would be, someone's listening to this, they've kind of heard where you are, you're diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal or geal, however we decided to pronounce that, cancer. It's kind of changed your perspective or maybe brought your previous opinions or perspective to light. Someone's hearing all that and they're just like, damn, that sucks. Maybe I should be doing something different with my life. Maybe I should be pursuing music or pursuing whatever it is. What advice do you have to them?
I think, regardless of what your situation in life is, your first goal should be to figure out how to be happy or as happy as you can be. And whatever that means, don't live for other people, live for yourself. And that doesn't mean be completely selfish. There are boundaries, but I do really feel that the vast majority of people I've met in my life are doing what they think their parents want them to do. And that extends even into middle age and later. Unfortunately, I've met men in their 50s who talk about their revelations and how they're kind of still doing what dad wanted them to do. And I think that's one of the biggest fallacies of just humans in general. It's that I don't know if it's living in the shadows or what it is, but it's like, I'm doing what everybody else thinks I'm supposed to do because that alleviates stress in my life, because it's easier just to acclimate and, for lack of a less harsh word, just to be a sheep. We hear that term about sheep or whatever, and there's all kinds of ways to look at that. But I don't want to say that as like it's this terrible thing. For some people, that's just easier. But I do believe for a lot of people, they don't want to be that way. They're just so scared to go out and do the thing that they actually want to do. And I think people need to figure that out. Put it on paper, make a list, whatever it takes to remind yourself every day that this is what I'd actually like to be doing. And if there's no financial gain to doing that, then you need to recognize that that's something that's always going to be a leisure time activity. And you're going to have to suffer through something you don't want to do to get to that. I think for most people, making the leap is the challenge. But being so afraid of rejection and failure is the overarching thing as to why they don't actually make the leap. And you need to assess that and analyze it and be like, what is rejection and what is failure? Is failure not making my parents happy? Because I don't necessarily believe that's true. And to be able to separate yourself from that indoctrination that we seem to have in this country, like especially in the Midwest, where we're supposed to do this stuff. And that's why I'm doing it, because I'm supposed to. Well, who the hell made that rule? And you really need to think about that. What are the rules? I think for most people, the rules are whatever they come up with in their head. They're not actually rules. We think they're rules, but it's bullshit. Like, there aren't rules. Yeah. Pay your own bills. Work to the point where you can do that and achieve that and be happy and focus on that. And if you're not happy because you're trying to make other people happy, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I've done it many times in my life, and I've learned, and you perhaps diagnose me as being insane how many times I've wanted to make other people happy before myself. And having cancer, I'm steering back towards the middle. I'll say I'm not completely selfish or completely selfless, but I'm going to do stuff that makes me be happy. And if I could give my 21-year-old self this advice, it would be just that. Like, hey, man, you don't have to go out and do that shit just because so-and-so said you did. Like, just figure it out. Find a job that's tolerable to make ends meet. Quit spending all your money on dumb stuff. Quit, $600 a month just going out and drinking is a very realistic number for a lot of people. But yeah.
I want to piggyback off what you said, because I think that was a really, really good answer. And this is stuff I think and talk about all the time. I think I make some people really uncomfortable when I talk about this stuff, because I'm so fascinated by it. And really, it's because I fucked it up so much when I was younger. Well, I'm only 31, almost 32, but in my 20s, I definitely was not always, for the most part, most of my decisions were based on like, how can I find what I would be doing something so I could create a world, or I guess myself, in a way that I could, like, I would have value, like, oh, I'm a successful entrepreneur. That means I'm important and like I'm successful and all these things. And it's like, that's like the farthest thing from my mind anymore. It's more like the fact that, you got one shot at this, how you spend your time, what people think of you, are like, how you spend your time is extremely important. What people think of you is really not, as long as you're not hurting people. I mean, right? But it's like this thing that, I mean, it doesn't matter like how much we have in the bank account. It's not like a scoreboard, right? That's not like, I'm sure that wasn't the first thing. The day you got diagnosed, you probably didn't, I'm assuming you didn't like think like, oh shit, if only I had more money, that's probably like the last thing that went through your head. So cause I think about this a lot, and I was even running the math. I'm like, you could very easily go be like pursue whatever you're excited about, whatever makes you happy, and then get a job that helps you like at least pay your bills, and then just cut costs completely until you can figure out how to make enough money doing what you love. Hopefully you're good at it too. That might help. But so yeah, it's like, can you go be a barista and rent out your friend's spare bedroom for a couple of years while you pursue your music career, whatever it is? You don't have to. We don't have to pursue that 7-figure career with the corner office. Matt, I really appreciate you, taking the time to stop by and, share your experiences. I know we didn't really dive into like the story of your diagnosis and your treatment and all that, but I think that you'll share in a second where people can find that information. I hope that people can listen to this and maybe do like a 1-to-1 comparison about where they are in their life and where they would like to go based on kind of what you've shared, and how that your journey, your perspective has changed on this. So if they do want to get a hold of you, how would they do so? And then any final words for listeners out there?
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you for having me on your podcast. This is the first podcast I've ever been on. Being a musician most of my life, I've been on stage a lot and talked into microphones, but I was always told that the sound engineering wasn't that good and people just heard mumbles. So I hope you can edit this audio so that enunciation is it has the clarity of a songbird. But as far as cancer goes, I do want to say something briefly. I was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer. I went through chemotherapy and radiation therapy. My last biopsies and scans revealed no viable cancer. The last step in esophageal cancer is to actually have your esophagus surgically removed, and I have turned that down. Some people think I'm crazy. Most people think I'm brave. There's a lot of reasons behind that, and you can find those reasons in my online ramblings at cancerislife.com. My entire cancer treatment journey has been documented. There's a couple gaps in there. I will explain those gaps as when I wasn't feeling good, so I didn't write for a month or two or something to that effect. You can find my contact information on there if you want to reach out and talk about cancer or anything. I'm always willing to open up about stuff and my experiences with life in general, but if you want to talk about cancer and surviving cancer and what that's like, you can always shoot me an email.
All right, I have one last question because I just thought of this. So let's say someone is going through whether it's cancer or another struggle in life. What advice do you have for them?
Do the drugs. It's funny, but I've met patients while going through treatment who refuse to get on medication and they're miserable and unhappy. Do yourself a favor and swallow your pride and whatever it is that makes you think that you're super strong and you don't need help and all this stuff, and just succumb to some of it. It really helps. They have very powerful pharmaceuticals out there to kind of put you in a blur and keep you happy and keep things balanced and even in your brain. Do whatever it takes for yourself and for your loved ones close to you to get through this in the most healthy way possible. And as far as coping mechanisms go, don't go out and just get obliterated with alcohol abuse and things like that. Talk to a doctor, talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever it takes, and find something to help you get through it. And I can't say that enough. And more specifically, because I weaned myself off the medications I was taking, and in that, all this clarity surfaced. And for about 3 to 4 weeks, just a few months ago, I was incredibly depressed coming off of the drugs. And the reason is because my diagnosis just slapped me in the face once I came off the drugs. It's worth mentioning this because in that, I realized how much the medication helped me get through all the treatment and wake up every day. And I almost don't like talking about this because people want to view me as being this overly optimistic, tough person. But I'll be honest with you. I don't know how I would have done several moments, at least throughout treatment, without a pill to pop and just be kind of like, I'm just going to take the load off. And just do it for yourself. There is no reason under the sun why people should go to bed every night afraid that they're going to die and that life's going to be over, and people's wheels turn. And, people drink to stop the wheels. They smoke weed to stop the wheels. They take pharmaceuticals. Some people do all of that. I had a pill specifically called lorazepam, and I took one every evening, and I got so inundated into that regimen. I can look back on it now, having weaned myself off of it, and realize that pill in and of itself really helped me get through a lot of this stuff. There's a reason pharmaceuticals exist. Whether or not you're against them or for them, it doesn't matter. I'm telling you right now, if you get diagnosed with a terminal disease or any life-altering disease and you're at your wit's end, pursue some kind of medication for it. I strongly advise that. There is no use in spending what's left of your life on earth miserable for some sort of dignity or prideful, I'm not going to take medication. It's just not worth it. In the era we live in where machoism is sort of fading away slowly but surely, that's happening for a reason, because we need to become more in touch with our emotional awareness and recognize our problems and the mechanisms we choose to cope with said problems. And when you get diagnosed with a gastro cancer like mine, drinking alcohol is not an option. And it's not that I ever abused it beforehand, but I did look forward to it on a weekend here and there. You gotta do something else for yourself. You gotta give yourself a fighting chance. And there's no harm in admitting, hey, maybe I need to get on some anti-anxiety meds, or maybe I need to get on some antidepressants. More power to you if you don't think you need that stuff. But I can tell you by the multiple accounts I've read for stage 4 cancer patients, the ones who aren't taking medications, they are miserable existences and not people you want to be around. Do yourself a favor and figure out how to be content with your situation and move forward and give yourself the best fighting chance. And don't look at it as, I'm going to be on medication the rest of my life. Look at it as, this is temporary. I need this to get through this situation, and I'm going to suck it up and just do it. If not for myself, but for my family and loved ones around me. Because there were moments where the meds weren't working when I was doing treatment, and I was miserable. I had nights where I got up and I cried and I thought, why am I doing any of this? This is pointless. There were times where I felt so terrible from the treatment that I was just like, I don't want to live, because it just gets to that point where you're sick and you feel like shit every single day. If you can pop a tiny little pill and take all those feelings away, it's worth it, in my opinion. Like, it really is. And I think more people should open up about that and at least try it. I don't think the entire world needs to live off medication per se. I wish people could figure it out. But if you can't figure it out, your life is worth it. Being happy is worth it. Being around people and making them happy is worth it. I would hope that everybody has these values and goals in their life. And so suck it up. Take a pill, get through the situation. Don't look at it as a lifelong thing. Look at it as a temporary thing. And once you get through it, and then on to the next goal and the next step. And perhaps with that endeavor, you don't need to take medication.
All right, that's a wrap for with our conversation with Matthew. Manuel, like you said, just check out his website on cancerislife.com to read more about his treatment and experiences in the whole process. All right, if you have an extra 5 minutes or 3 minutes, however much time you have, pull up your podcast application and leave us a review. Reviews help people like you to find us when they're looking for a new podcast to listen to, and it helps us, know that we're doing a good job and keep on going. So if you could leave us a review, that would be awesome. Now that's a wrap for this week's show. I appreciate you stopping by, and I look forward to you tuning in next time.